basic considerations, just a couple things before we actually do any of the exercises, and you probably have been through this before with other people that you worked out with, but just to reiterate and for the sake of the people watching, a couple things. First and foremost, controlled speed of movement. You want to take about 3 seconds or so to lift, a little bit slower on the negative, and you want to reverse direction smoothly in between lifting and lowering. You don't want to let the weight slam down, you don't want to have it bounce, you don't want to suddenly yank or jerk or lunge at the weight starting out. On the compound pushing movements, anything where you can lock out, you want to avoid it. When you get close to lockout, slow down, reverse direction before you actually lock out. Everything else will have you pause briefly in the contracted position. But you don't want to start really squeezing hard in the fully contracted position until after a couple repetitions. First few reps, pause there, starting with about 3rd, 4th repetition or so, then I'll have you start really squeezing. You want to make sure that you are breathing continuously throughout the exercise. You don't want to hold your breath, you don't want to Valsalva, exhale forcefully against a closed glottis. To do that, you have an increase in pressure in the thorax and abdomen. Not a big deal for a brief period of time, and it has a place in certain competitive lifts. When you're working with a little bit slower repetition speed, you don't want to do that. You want to make sure that you keep the head and neck in a neutral position, straight forward, chin slightly down. Regardless of the exercise, even if it's a leg exercise, there's usually some tension in the muscles around the neck and shoulders. Any sudden movement, and there's a possibility of a pull or a strain in the neck. You don't want to have that. Especially anytime you're doing any pulling exercises or anything pressing where there's a lot of tension in the trapezius.
Yeah, your traps,
Yeah, just best thing is look straight ahead, chin slightly down. Want to make sure that you keep the grip relaxed, except on pulling exercises. If you're pulling, you have to grip hard enough that you're able to maintain, hold on the weight. For anything else, for the pushing exercises with the machines, there's nothing you can drop, so you don't need to really squeeze. Leg exercises, we're going to do the leg press. You're going to need to have hands on the handle just to help keep you stable in the seat, but you don't need to grip, and you don't want to. Excessive gripping and contribute to an increase in blood pressure, so I want to minimize that. It's pretty much, the rest of the stuff doesn't really apply for what we're doing right now. Of course, you mentioned the knee a little bit.
Yeah.
Anything weird in the knee, stop right away and let me know. If you start to feel like you're getting a headache, even if you think you might be imagining it, stop right away and let me know. Yeah, nauseous. A little bit of nausea, a little bit of lightheadedness, elevated heart rate, breathing heavy, all those things are completely normal. Muscles are going to be screaming at you after a while. All that kind of stuff, work through it as best you can. The better you can push through that, the more you're going to get out of the exercises. In fact, with the burning, most people, and I'm not going to turn this into a big thing right now, but most people stop when it starts burning. Most people believe that at that point, that burning is an indication that they're coming to the end of the set. Far from it. When you start to feel the burning, that's an indication that you're hitting the most beneficial part of the exercise, and that should be your cue to contract even harder. So you don't want to think of that burning as an indication that the set is coming to an end. You want to think about the burning as an indication that you're reaching the most important part.
Take it
that's
up a
where
notch.
Really, exactly. Take it up a notch.
When it's hardest, push the hardest.
Yeah, it's those last couple repetitions that are the absolute most important. And if you stop when you start getting sore or start burning before you get there, you're going to miss out on the best part of the entire exercise, the most beneficial part. I was going to say something else. Oh, anything outside of the muscle burn, though, any sharp, any sudden pain, if the knee starts feeling even a little bit iffy, stop right away and let me know. First thing we're going to do is neck extension and flexion. And you want to try out the 4-way neck machine. Couple adjustments that need to be made on this one. The height of the seat needs to be adjusted so that we get you lined up correctly for this. We're going to start in this position for the extension. We're going to move it a little bit further forward for flexion. About 5'9", 5'10".
5'10".
Okay. Also bring this down. We're going to drop the weight while we're testing the position. You've never done neck extension?
Not since football. I was in
Okay.
senior high school.
I'm going to actually jump in and demonstrate really quick then. With all the exercises, and a lot of people don't give a lot of consideration to this, but there's a bunch of stages. There is entry, there is, setup, there is the actual performance of the exercise, then there is unloading and exit. And a lot of people, when they teach exercise, they start at doing the exercise. This is what you do, but really don't cover anywhere near as much as they should about, how do you get into the machine in the first place? Once you're in, how do you correctly and safely load yourself? And in the case of a machine, basically get into position where you're able to move, pull, push, or whatever against the weight. Or with a barbell, what is the correct way to pick it up if you're doing a standing exercise, or remove it from the rack?
Lower back, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But entry, exit, all those things are important. With this, it's relatively straightforward. With some of the other exercises, not so much. I already know my seat position on this, and actually it's there, so I'm just going to demonstrate.
You're a little bit shorter than me?
Huh?
You're a little bit shorter than me? Yeah.
I'm about 5'8" or so. What I'm going to have you do is stepping in, first off, watch out for the thing there. You don't want to bang your shins on anything. And I'm going to have you sit back, and I'm going to come back so that the head is centered. Should feel like the very back of the head is sitting right in this space here, with the head forward and down. You have you place your feet on there, and you're just going to kind of straighten up, but you want to keep your chin down. And it's important to note that you're not slumped forward. It's not this kind of a movement, but it's almost like, how you bring your chin down when you're holding a sheet, when you're folding it? You want that position. So that's your start.
And your body's not moving, obviously.
Your body's going to move somewhat, but you shouldn't be swaying back and forth. If the neck is extending, you're going to have a little bit of extension of the spine. You can't really do one without a little bit of the other.
You want to minimize it.
Yeah, you just don't want to have a lot of back and forth body sway.
Yeah.
So you want to start chin tucked down. Center of the head should be back in here. Just going to straighten up and slowly push back, pause, and then even a little bit slower on the way back down. And let the chin come down. You should feel just a little bit of a stretch, but it shouldn't feel like it's really forcing you in that position. Again, like you're raising the chin, pulling the back of the head down towards the back of the neck and shoulders, and then as you're coming forward, you're just letting it bring the head forward and chin down. Now the difference is you don't want, and this is what a lot of people are doing on this, and you see they got the head coming way forward. You don't want the head just coming forward, you want it coming down. And that's the difference, I don't know if you can see, but the difference between this and that.
So it's using your neck.
Yeah, well, you're using your neck either way, but the movement that you want is this movement as opposed to that kind of a thing. Going the other way, and I'll just demonstrate this real quick before you start. We'll just do one then the other. Move it up to the middle, and tip this up a little bit. And you want to position it so that these pads are more on the cheekbones, and that the forehead is right up here. And have you bring it forward just a little bit. Now on flexion, it's kind of weird to talk to this thing in here. In the flexion, you're not going to go way back. Flexion, you're going to stop right about neutral. And this is a weird one because what people want to do is this, where they lean into it, but you want to keep your chest up and just pull the chin down. So instead of this, which is what you usually see, think about keeping the chest high, pushing at the forehead, but pulling the chin down. Again, like you're trying to tuck your chin down into the sternum.
Should I try to use my chest against the floor as a brace or no?
Nah, you don't really need to use the pad. The pad,
Good
it's a
intentions.
positional reference. You can set it up so you use it during the exercise. It's unnecessary. The old Nautilus machine just had handles on both sides, and that worked fine. If you've got strong enough arms, you can just hold yourself in proper position.
Am I going to do the side ones too, or no?
Huh?
Am I going to do the side ones or the flexion extension?
Now, there's actually a ton of overlap. To grossly oversimplify, think about having pistons in four corners, and if you've got the two pistons in the back firing, it's pulling back, two in the front,
Gotcha.
but in the sides. So basically what you have with flexion and extension versus lateral flexion and extension is just, it's a lot like what's going on in the forearm with flexion and extension versus adduction and abduction. It's the same muscles working in conjunction with different groups. So same muscles involved, going back and forth, but the side ones working with each other instead of the back or the front. So we'll just do the extension and then we'll do the flexion. And I'm going to start, if you haven't done this for a while, conservatively. And also with your height, I'm going to drop it down a little bit. And try to center.
You're probably going to want to reset that. It's been a while.
Centered right
It's in the
in the middle of the pad. And you want to kind of slow down and you're just going to straighten your body up into it. And then let the head forward a little bit. And keep the chest high and think about letting the chin forward and down. And does the weight feel like it's going to be doable for at least about 7 or 8 reps?
I think so, but it's hard to gauge and it feels just a little bit awkward because I haven't done this in five years.
At first it's going to feel like it's going to slip off your head. In fact, I'm actually going to bring you up a little bit higher.
On the seat?
Yeah, I'm going to bring you up a little bit.
Yeah, it feels like it's going to slip.
I want to have this a little bit further down. Okay. Yeah, it's a little bit difficult to gauge sometimes other people's stuff off the height because you might have a bunch of people who are the same height, but depending on leg length relative to torso length, once they're sitting down, it's hard to say. Anyway, step out for just a second. I'm going to bring this up probably about 2. And right there. Yeah, I can already tell that looks a lot better.
Yeah.
And just kind of let the chin forward and down.
Great.
Just keep the chest high. As you're loading into it, sit up straight, raise the chest, and you want to try and maintain that general attitude of the torso during the exercise. The chest, the back is going to move a bit. You just don't want to use the body swaying back and forth to move the weight.
Pause, right?
Yep, just a brief pause. On this one, not going to really have you push and squeeze when you get to the finished position.
To be honest, it feels too easy, like significantly. I feel like I could do 20 of these.
Bump it up. Try one there. And try a couple, do about 2 or 3, and then we'll adjust it. On some exercises, it might not feel like a whole lot at first, but it just takes a couple repetitions before it kind of catches up to you.
I used to do that a lot back in the day when I started this.
Yeah.
I could do more.
New rep doesn't feel like anything. About 2 or 3 into it, you realize that you're just a little too heavy. And be conservative with the stretch. You want to feel a stretch, but you don't want to push the stretch on any exercise.
This feels really good.
It's an important exercise. It's one that everybody should do, extension and flexion. Problem is, the way most people train, if they did it, they'd probably do more harm than good.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of gyms don't have them just because they're afraid of the liability. Great machine if used properly. Horrible machine if you use it wrong. So far. Good speed both directions. Think about raising the chin, pulling the back of the head back and down towards the back of the neck, shoulders. And as you're letting the weight back forward, make sure you keep your chest high. It starts to get harder. People have a tendency to start to slump and then use the body to get it started. Hold it briefly. Good. Take your time on the way back. Again, make sure you keep the chest high. Gradually increase your effort. As the reps start to slow down, you want to really start to dig in deep. Try not to let it slow you down too much. Don't move quickly, don't yank or jerk or bounce the weight, but try not to let it slow you down too much during the positive. I want you to start this one slowly, start it smoothly. Once you get it going, I want you to gradually push a little harder until you're pushing as hard as you can. As long as you build up gradually, you don't need to hold anything back. back of the head, back and down. Hold it. Take your time in the negative. Really slow in the negative on this one.
My hip kicking in. My hip. It's tightening up.
Does it hurt or is it just tightening up?
It's just tightening up.
Try and ignore it. Keep your chest up. Gradually push a little harder, dig in deep. If there's any fibers left you haven't gotten, you want to find them now. A little further, breathe. Hold, slow on the negative. Slower.
Holy shit.
In most cases, whatever a person can do in extension, about half of that is good for flexion. I'm going to have you step out.
It's so little. So hard.
Yeah, and you feel it down to about the middle of your
I
back?
felt I felt the creep. It basically crept down, and I felt it.
Are you
Yeah.
still doing it?
It loosened up a little bit.
Sit up real tall. You want to have the pad. You know, I'm going to bring the seat up just
Yeah, I
a
was gonna
little
say-
further.
Yeah.
I'm going to have you up a little bit higher for that one. Because the forehead should be solidly on this part of the pad there. That should almost kind of fit you like boxing headgear. And watch your head get in behind it. So that the top part is over the forehead, and then where it curves in, it should be more.
And it's a real small movement. It's just kind of like.
Yeah, you want to bring it forward just a little bit. And you can actually hold that forward with one arm as long as you got the handles with the other one.
I feel like I'm almost. It's. There we go.
If you start with it back, then you're not going to have. If you let it touch down in between, you lose some tension during the exercise. You got it?
Yeah, I got it.
You're going to hold it there. I'm going to hand it to you.
Okay.
Hold it perfectly still while I'm handing it to you. Ready?
Yep.
And it is yours. Now keep your chest high. Think about tucking the chin down into the chest. Pause very briefly. Take your time on the way back. And you don't want to go really far back. Just to about neutral on this one. There. That's as far as you need to go. Yep. Real short movement. Good. Pause. Slow on the way back. And raise the chest. And keep the chest real high. The tendency is for people to gradually start to slump as the exercise gets harder, and they're using their whole body, flexing the spine to try and push that down, but you want to just use the neck. And raise your chest to meet your chin as you press the pad down. Really take your time on the way back. Really slow down as you approach neutral. You only want to go to about a little further. There. That's plenty. And drive the chin down. Raise the chest up to meet it. Hold. Slow on the way back. Now, you might not be able to tell, but you're starting to segment the movement a little bit. You're moving, pausing. As much as possible, you want to keep it one smooth, continuous movement. Chest high, raise the chest to meet the chin as you come down. Slowly let it back. Try have a one smooth, continuous movement. And keep the chest up. Think about driving the chest up, driving the chin down. Raise your chest. Slow on the way back. And just to about there. Reverse direction smoothly. Really start to dig in. Try and keep the chest high. Fight the urge to slump. And keep it up. And stay on it. A few more seconds. 5 more seconds. 4. Chest high. 3, 2. Let it back slowly. I'll take it there. And ease off. Got it.
Whoa.
Yeah, that one also leaves you a little weird after
It just felt like I wasn't getting the movement right, but it felt like I wasn't connecting the dots with it. At least on this how to do it smoothly.
Yeah.
I feel it working though for sure. That too.
Yeah. It leaves a little.
I look like I'm high all the time anyway. I don't do anything for the record at all.
We're going to the leg press next.
Yeah. Call that the torture machine.
Yeah.
Call this the Keith Norris.
Huh?
Call it the Keith Norris.
Yeah. Bring it back, and I'm actually going to put a lighter weight on just for now while we're actually, getting the position. Once you got your seat positions and everything set up, then we'll bump the weight up. And I know, like we talked about earlier, some people like to pin it out, set the machine a little bit further forward so that the stoppers prevent you from locking out, but not going to do that.
Well, it can make it harder too, can it?
Huh?
It can make it more difficult too, right? That's
Yeah,
the problem
I just
everyone has with
don't
that
like
problem.
having people that far forward in the machine. Two reasons. One, if you start it in a little bit further forward position, you're also starting with the pad in a lower position. And for a particular thigh length, if you're starting with the pad or the pedal in a lower position, you're starting with the feet further down from the knees, a little bit more acute angles. Pushing back this way, if your feet are a little bit higher, the direction of the force is more in line with the lower legs. If you've got the feet a little bit lower, then the angle is such that you've got a little bit more stress on the knees. And the quadriceps also become more of a limiting factor. Additionally, when you're positioning yourself so that the machine is at the end of its range of motion when you get to lockout, the machine follows an arc so that although it's pushing mostly back, when it gets to the end, it wants to come up and back. And the tendency, if it gets low enough, is as people's legs get out and a little bit lower, just want to pick them up a little bit out of the seat.
Yeah.
People tend to pick their hips up and round their back more when they're set up that way. So I don't pin out the weight stack or do any of that for anybody. The thing is, the reason that some people do that is to prevent lockout during the exercise. You don't want to lock out during any leg pressing exercise for a couple reasons. Some of them having to do with safety, some of them having to do with the effectiveness of the exercise. Yeah, if the knees lock out, then the bones are aligned in such a way that they're supporting most of the resistance. You're really not doing that much work. The closer you get to full extension, the better the leverage, the easier it is to push through that. And the machine compensates for it somewhat. The machine actually gets harder and harder the further out you get, but it can't get hard enough to overcome that leverage. Once the legs are locked out, I could climb up on top of the weight stack, he could climb up on top of the weight stack, you could still hold it there. So you want to stop and reverse direction before that while you still have a good amount of tension on the muscles in the thighs. Also, you don't want to go to lockout because there's a possibility that one or both knees, if you lock out, can pop back, especially if the legs start getting really shaky. And most people don't have perfectly symmetrical bodies. Most people don't have completely
one leg longer than the other.
Yeah, proportional limb lengths. And if you've got one leg that's just a little bit shorter than the other, then it's going to lock out first. And in addition to the possibility of injuring that knee, it could cause the hips, the low back to tweak just a little bit. And
there's a lot of shit that can go wrong.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that can go wrong. So you want to avoid lockout. You want to go as far as you can without unloading the hip and thigh muscles. And usually when you start to get past about 10 degrees or so, you'll feel it. You'll notice that it starts to feel like it's getting a little bit easier, and that if you really wanted to, you could just almost fall through the rest of the movement. When you get to a point where you feel like you're getting close to locking out, you want to reverse direction. After a few repetitions, you'll be able to anticipate that point so that as you get there, you can slow down so that you can do so smoothly without spending too much time there.
So you control it.
Yeah, and also on this one and on a lot of the other exercises that we're going to be pushing, you're going to be able to bottom the weight stack out during the exercise. You want the weights to touch. You want to know that you got a full range of motion, but you get three things that you have to consider. One, again, you want the weights to touch because you want to know that you got a full range of motion during the exercise. But you want to make sure that you do not allow the weights to rest. You should touch, but you should not let off. You should not allow any slack into the system. The plate should just barely be touching. If I held a piece of paper in between, I shouldn't have to apply too much force to pull that out of there. And the third thing is, as soon as it touches, you want to slowly but smoothly, or immediately but slowly start the next repetition. You don't want to sit down and just hold there for too long. You want to just touch and just right away, but very slowly, squeeze out of that position. The only exception would be if at any point during the repetition, if you feel like you've lost positioning, that would be where you want to readjust. And I'm getting into a bunch of exceptions here, but during the exercise, while you're lifting and lowering, you don't want to squirm, you don't want to move your back, your shoulders, you don't want to do anything changing body position while you're pushing or letting the weight back. If you feel like you've lost position a little bit, then set it down, reset yourself, start the next repetition. Otherwise, don't let yourself rest at all during the exercise. Now, what I'm going to have you do, this machine in particular, is, again, with entry and exit, biggest thing with this machine is that I don't want you smacking your shins on that. What you don't want to do is just step over and sit back in. What I want you to do is stand next to it, sit back in from the side, swing the feet up, and I'm placing so that the heels are by the bottom of the pedal and feet are angled out just a little bit. Once you're in position, I'm going to have you push up and back so that your hips are back in the angle of the seat. Lay back. I'm going to bring this down so that it's pressing, not too hard, but firmly on the shoulders. And then I'm going to move you forward, basically, as far as we can. We want to get as close to the weight as possible without a couple things happening. And those things are, one, you don't want to have any sliding the hips. If your hips start sliding forward, then we're getting you too close. You're starting to lose proper positioning. We don't want to have the lower back rounding. You don't want to feel any pain or discomfort in the hips or feel like there's too much pressure on the abdomen or anything in the knees or ankle. So if you start feeling any of those things as we're moving you forward, I'm going to stop them.
Any comment on the Biceps on this one?
Best shoes for it. You want to have generally flat shoes. If you have shoes that have big cushy bottoms, then people are more likely to have the feet move laterally during the exercise.
What I've noticed too on this is, particularly this one, I don't know why versus the Nautilus that I use a lot, but as you get deeper and deeper in the set, your toes actually start spreading out more and more. And it's almost like you're using more and more of whatever's down there. I don't know if you've had that same experience or not.
I haven't really noticed it too much.
It's always been a big thing for me. I'm like, what the hell? Because you feel it just like...
Well, as you have pressure on the feet, they're going to spread out a little bit. But I haven't really paid a whole lot of attention to it.
The watch them spread out. The Vibrams.
Okay, so I'm going to bring the heels up a little bit. You want to have the heels over that bottom edge. I'm going to bring you a little further.
Heels are definitely on. Just the shoes. Okay.
And you want to angle the feet out just a little bit. Oh, there it's good. Now make sure that your hips are all the way back in the angle of the seat. And watch out, that's the release handle. Yeah, if you push down, you could go back. Now to make sure, lay all the way back in the seat.
Yeah, I feel like it should be a lot closer. I've always loved the Medics too, because this one has the pads for it up.
Yeah, it keeps you from sliding up and out of the back of the seat without having to yank up on the handles. Now, speaking of the handles, I want you to put your thumbs on the same side as the fingers.
Okay.
You can still pull, you can still use the arms to help hold yourself down in the seat, but you're less likely to squeeze, and you want to keep the grip relaxed during this one. Now, alternately, some people like to hold on to the pads during the exercise. Either is fine. The important thing is that you keep the grip relaxed.
Yep. Yeah, one thing I used to do is kind of like that when I did it. I would just actually use the inner part of my hand there.
Yeah, as long as you're not gripping, as long as you're not squeezing. Now something else, in this position, as far back as you recline, your head is resting on the pad. You don't want to pick it up. If you pick the head up, then there's going to be a lot of tension in the muscles in the front of the neck. But you also want to avoid pressing back. Some people have a tendency as they're pushing to start arching back, to start pushing the head into the pad. Let your head rest there, but make sure that you keep the neck relaxed and that you don't press back with the head. Now I want you to relax the legs. I'm going to move the seat forward a little bit. And if you start to feel yourself sliding forward, the background, the hips coming up, any discomfort in the knees, ankles, or hips, or if you feel like there's too much pressure on the abdomen, let me know right away. Now relax the legs.
Probably right there.
Up there.
Yeah. I feel like I'm having trouble starting it at this point.
Well, I'm going to have you relax the legs for a second. I'm going to bring this back. I'm going to drop the weight considerably, and this is not going to be your exercise weight, but I just want to have you do a repetition. I want to see how it works.
Yep. Go for it.
Yep. Remember not to lock out. You want to start to slow down, and right about there is as far as you're going to go. Now, as you're on the way back, you also want to anticipate the start point. Slow down to meet it. You want to let the weights touch, but it shouldn't feel like they touch down hard. It should just barely touch, or you slowly squeeze out of the start. Right about there, you want to start to slow, a little further, you want to start to slow down there, and then reverse direction when you've still got maybe about 5-10 degrees before lockout. You're going to have to set it down, you're going to bump the weight up a little bit. Let's try.
Yeah, if I remember, the last time I used a medic leg press, I did 760. Don't remember any of the seat settings, but that was the total.
This puts us at 760 pounds total.
That was over a year ago. Almost.
Well, if that's been a year, we'll try it here and see if that works. This is about 720.
Granted, I haven't done leg press in a couple months too.
Now, we can always do a breakdown or a strip set.
Yeah.
Generally, what I look for is for people to get about 7 to 10 repetitions in most exercises. If you're within a rep or two of that, then we'll do some forced reps to get you there if you fall a little bit short. If you don't get within at least 3 repetitions of that, if you fall about 3-4 repetitions or so short, then we'll do a drop set. We'll bring the weight down maybe to 10% or so.
So what's it say right now?
720.
All right, let's see if I can get 20 of them.
Now take your time at the start. Try and barely move starting out. Gradually push a little harder until it starts moving. And then hard enough that you're getting about 3 seconds in the positive. And breathe through it. Neck relaxed. Focus all of your effort on the hips and thighs. Hands very lightly touch, and then take your time starting out. 3. Bring it back slow. Good. Hands very lightly touch. You want to make sure that you touch. You want to get that full range of motion, but you don't want to give the muscles even a little bit of rest in between. Good. Make sure you keep the neck relaxed. Now, if we were doing rest pause, it'd be a bit different thing, but here I want continuous tension on the muscles. Try and breathe as relaxed, as naturally as possible. You don't want to force the breathing at all. Just a little further back in the next one. I want to hear the weights touch in between. Don't sit them down, but make sure you let them touch. Good. And slow the negative down just a little bit more. Take your time on the way back. Slow the negative down. Just lightly touch, start it slow, and then drive the heels through the toe. Good. Try and maintain that pace. Nice and slow in the negative, but don't let it slow you down too much in the positive. Aim to get at least about 4 seconds. Don't need to go a lot faster than that, but try not to let it slow you down much more than that. Slow it down, slow it down. Slow on the way back. 3 to 4 seconds on the way up. Good. And slow. Really slow on the way back. Fight it all the way down and right away to the next one. Stop even. Breathe. Keep breathing. Stay on it. Stay on it. Now hold it. I'm going to hand it back to you, and I want you to keep it there. Ready? It. is yours. Keep it there.
Holy
Keep it there. Keep it there. 5 more seconds. 4, 3, 2. Yeah. Okay. Now, unlock it. Bring it back. Do not trust your legs after this. Swing out to one side or the other. Doesn't matter. There's nothing in your way on the other side. Make sure you got both feet on the ground when you stand on the machine. When you stand, don't try to walk right away. Just stand for a few seconds. Make sure you can do that before you try to take a step.
Yeah, next week.
Make sure don't step out yet. Make sure you got both feet on the ground. When both feet are on the ground, then stand. Stand for a few seconds to make sure you can do that, then walk.
I think the thing with my toes is that I go through it, I have a tendency to get off my heels.
Yeah, you don't want to do that. You want to keep it down. Keep the heels down.
Just put it all in your back here and your quads.
Well, if you start coming up on the toes, the tendency is to focus more on extending the knees and not so much on driving with the hips.
That's what I
glutes
figured.
and hamstrings. Yeah, and you don't want to have that. So you want to have, because the thighs, the quadriceps are already a weak link, the leg press. Yeah. Are you doing that?
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah, that's next one we do is the front or underhand grip pull down. Couple things, and first is going to be the grip. A lot of people don't realize that there's more to grip during exercise than just grabbing the bar, grabbing the handles. How you grip or how you should grip is different whether you're pushing or pulling or doing a rotary exercise. If you're doing a pushing exercise, I'm going to demonstrate it this way so that you can see. You don't want to grab from the center of the palm. What happens is if you grab a bar from the center of the palm, as you wrap your hands around it, this skin back here starts to fold over, and then regardless of what the hand position is in at the start of the exercise, eventually it's going to pull so that you got a straight line from your wrist through that handle in the direction that you're pulling. And in turning, it's going to pull on this. If you get calluses, it can tear them. What you want, if you're doing a pulling exercise, is to start by placing the pads right behind the fingers against the handle on the side from the direction that you're going to be pulling from. So that if you're pulling down and back, you'd start with the pads behind the fingers here, then wrap the fingers around, and then clamp the thumb over the middle and index fingers if you can. What you don't want is to start here and grab this because it's going to end up pulling like this anyways with a heavy enough weight and pinching all the stuff back here.
Do you have hooks, or do you want to use them there?
Don't use hooks.
Yeah.
If you've got a
Super
problem,
slow foot, true believers.
yes, if you want to develop a pussy grip, basically. If a person has a neurological disorder, if a person has a hand injury, if there's some reason that they absolutely cannot hold on, then hooks are great. Hooks are great for people who need them, really need them. If your hand works, you should be using it during the exercise. In fact, if you can't, you should be doing additional grip work to strengthen that. From a practical standpoint, now I know, a lot of people train because they want to look better. And there's a lot of general health and fitness benefits to exercise that don't specifically relate to picking up or pulling heavy stuff. But from a practical standpoint, to be able to apply the strength that you develop in a lot of different activities, you need to have strong hands. You could have the strongest hips and thighs and back and shoulders in the world, but if you have a weak grip, you're not going to be able to pick up things over a certain weight like that. Yeah, your hands are literally your interface between the rest of the body and things that you're trying to manipulate, whether you're lifting or pushing or pulling them. And it's ridiculous to develop pulling strength and not have a grip to apply it with. Anyways, I'm going off on a tangent. What we're going to do during the exercise is set the seat so that it's just high enough so that you can barely reach this. And the reason I want that, and I'm demonstrating the lightweight, is so that during the exercise you still have, a load on the muscles in this. You don't want to have the weight set down. Now, we're not going to really stretch out on this one. You want to go until the elbows are almost but not completely straight, and you want to let your shoulders up. But you don't want to go, way real far out in this one. You want to keep everything tight. And something else that I should mention of that is you've got a couple things going on. Your elbows are bending, Your shoulders are extending, the elbows are coming down the back, and you've got elevation and depression of the shoulders during the exercise. And you want these things to all start and end at the same time. You want to have the timing down between the different parts of the movement.
Yep.
What a lot of people will do is this, where they go until the elbows are straight, and then they let the shoulders up, and then they initiate the movement with shoulder depression, and then they start bending the elbows. What happens is, as soon as the elbows are almost straight or straight, and you start doing this, you're spending all this time doing this movement while giving your biceps a break. What you want is, as you're letting the weight back up, let the shoulders come up, the elbows go forward and up, and straighten in time, so that as soon as the elbows are almost, don't let them lock out, because you want to keep a little bit of tension in the biceps, but almost straight, your shoulders should also be in this position. But you don't want to let the elbows straight and then go up and down. And you want to start bending the elbows. The start of the movement is the elbows bending. You don't want to shrug it down and then start bending the elbows. The elbows should be bending right from the start of the movement.
So the idea is to keep it one motion.
One motion. You don't want to
Best
break it
you
into a
can.
bunch of little movements. And as you're pulling the arms down and back, you should also be pulling the shoulders back, almost raising the chest to it, almost like you're trying to touch your elbows together behind your back. And yeah, the elbows, shoulders, everything should be moving in time.
Why do you prefer this over the medics pullover aside from the bicep work? Or do you prefer over the medics pullover next to you?
I prefer the pull down just because you're addressing a lot more muscle mass on one exercise.
Sure.
Pullover is a great exercise. It addresses a ton of things. And the upper back, chest, the abdominal muscles, back and shoulders. You're working a lot of stuff there. You're doing pretty much all that and your biceps on this one. Without getting into it too much, though,
Quick question,
the whole
what do you
concept of
What do you think's better, the Nautilus or the medics pullover?
the medics pullover.
Medics pullover.
Absolutely. If a person is coordinated enough to use it correctly.
Yeah.
And just a real quick thing.
They're individual, right?
If you want to look at the movement arms, yeah, now there's pros and cons. When a person is starting out, a very, very important consideration, one a lot of people are not even aware of, is that you have a hierarchy of motor learning difficulty. Certain types of exercises are more difficult to learn than others. And independent movement arms make it more difficult to learn an exercise than fused movement arms. The Med-X has independent movement arms, but they do for a very, very important reason.
And Nautilus does not.
Yeah, the Nautilus ones
It's all one.
just stay, they both move in one plane. And the problem with that is that the shoulders have less range of motion in this plane than they do if they're moving out a little bit of an angle. The glenoid fossa, the little depression that the head of your humerus sits in, is not angled forward, it's not angled straight at the side, it's actually angled forward at a little bit of an angle. And if you have somebody stand with their back flat against something, and they raise their arms straight up, they can usually get about there before they have to start arching the back. But, same position, if you come at an angle, you can go much, much further. You actually gain a significant amount of range of motion going that way as opposed to going this way. More importantly, and it's not so much the range of motion, but here's the real thing. When you have this movement coming up and back as opposed to this movement, it's less stressful and it's safer for the shoulders. And real,
Congruent.
yeah,
Working
real
the way your
quick,
body wants to work.
you notice the handles are not angled in on this one either. The handles are actually at an angle. So when you're doing this movement, the tendency is, demonstrated, is not, if you notice my arms aren't coming down and back like that, but the arms actually come out and back at a little bit more of an angle. The machine is moving so that the handles are going in pretty much one plane, but because of that angle, it's a little bit more comfortable. People tend to do that more.
Quick question, because we're kind of going on.
Okay.
Is there a reason the medics pull down the design this way, facing outwards, versus the Nautilus pull down, which is where you're facing inwards at it? The reverse, basically. Just whatever.
I think this is actually better because if you watch, one consideration with exercise equipment design is that when you have a pushing or a pulling movement, you have an arc that is congruent to the path of movement prescribed by the parts of the body moving. Now, when you're pushing or pulling, you can push or pull in roughly a straight line, but most human movements don't occur in perfectly straight lines. And with any push or pull, the main rotary movement is around the shoulders in this case. And if you have a movement where the axis of rotation is behind, it's coming down and back like that, it's basically moving in an arc that is prescribed, not perfectly congruent, but it's more congruent with the arc prescribed by the body as it's going through that movement than if it's coming down from the front. Now the way the Nautilus Nitro is set up, it comes at you from the front, it rotates from the front, but they have a swiveling, kind of freely moving bar at the end of that to kind of accommodate that and compensate for it. Otherwise, if it was a rigid movement arm and if they didn't have that joint in there, it would feel really, really weird. And the same is the case with compound rowing or seated rowing machines. The Nautilus seated row rotates from below, but it's got those freely moving arms at the end of it, and they have to do that because otherwise it's really awkward to come up and back as opposed to, because if you're pulling straight back, your hands come down and back as your elbows do. You have an arc that looks like that. You don't want to have an arc that looks like that while your body's moving like that. And the Medic's row is like that too. Nautilus makes great equipment, and if a person does not have the money for Medics, or if they don't have the space for it, because the Medics machines are a little bit bigger, the Nautilus Nitro is the next best thing to it. And they're good machines, they're very smooth machines, they're a little more space efficient, more cost efficient. The Medic stuff is awesome though.
Yeah.
If you've got the space for it. If you've got the money for it, then it's pretty much the way to go. But as I've recommended Nitro to a lot of people too, it was a better fit for what they were trying to do for their situation. And again, both of them are really good machines, just Medix has some advantages over that. Anyways, they're ready to consider starting out, is you should just get it with your fingertips, because it might look like we've got it, but when you've got a weight pulling you up, the belt is going to stretch a little bit, the tissue on the front of the thighs is going to compress a little bit, so you're going to come up a little. So we're going to have it so you can just barely get that with your fingertips. Now don't push it down yet. From that position, can you try to get the handles first? Can you get the handles with just about the fingertips? We're going to bring the seat down. You have to step out for a second, watch out for the foot lever there. Don't want to have you bang your shins. But probably just one down should do it. Remember, when you're getting your grip, put the pads behind your fingers against the handle, wrap your fingers over, then wrap the thumbs over. You want to lean forward a little bit. Don't let the back of your head touch the seat. That's mainly there so you just don't bang yourself in the bar if you lean back. The pad is not actually meant to be leaned against during the exercise. You don't want to have the head back against that, because if your head is touching it, there's a tendency for people to tense up.
Back and off of it, or just touching it?
Back doesn't need to be on it at all. Just straight up and down is fine. And you want to have a little bit of a wider grip. The hand should actually be just a little bit outside of the shoulders on this one. Right about there is good. And I'm just going to have you do a repetition just so we can see how it looks. And then if it looks good, then we'll get you belted in and get some weight on it. Raise your chest. Think about pulling the elbows down and back. Pause and let it back slow.
It's not like that for the leg press.
And remember the timing too. The elbows, the shoulders, elevation of the shoulders, all that should start and end at the same time. And that looks good. Then have you set it down, get belted in, crank the belt about as tight as you can. Have you used this one before?
Nope, never seen it before.
All right, we're going to try this.
Well, I'm familiar with the Nautilus pretty well.
We'll see how that this feels. Actually, we'll try about there starting out. If it feels too light, you can always bump it up a little bit.
I was doing 215 on the Nautilus Nitro
215 on the Nautilus Nitro.
for about 8 reps, 10 reps.
We'll try it there.
About the same speed.
Yeah, the weights are different between the two. Nautilus Nitro, you can't compare machine to machine because
The leg press is like that too.
The what?
leg press is like that too.
Yeah, the stroke of the weight stack is completely different. You got roughly, a foot-pound or less of work for every pound on the weight stack on these, whereas the Nautilus ones, you might have a 1.5, maybe 2 foot-pounds of work for every pound on the weight stack because of the differences in the stroke. There are advantages to to this, there's advantages to that. If we go into, now we're talking too much about that stuff, not getting into
21 convention.
Huh?
21 convention.
Yeah, we'll go to that
There you go.
convention. If anybody's interested. I
If
got
I
a whole
survive.
bunch of other things to talk about.
If
don't
I
wanna bore
survive
you
by then.
with that,
I
yeah.
survived the workout.
Now bring it down a little bit. Remember, start your grip from the pads behind the fingers. Just press that pedal down with your feet. I'll bring it down if we can. And a little bit wider. You want to have it just outside shoulder width.
Right there?
Yeah, try and really clamp your thumbs down over the nails on the index and middle fingers if you can. Head forward. Now gradually transfer the weight. Let up easy so that you gradually let the weight up to the arms. When you get to the end, I want you to pause, but I don't want you to really start squeezing
Right there.
there. Right about there. And is that going to be doable for at least about 7 or 8 reps?
I'll make sure.
Yeah, you want to go until the elbows are almost, but not quite completely straight. Just barely there. And that's when you want to start. Just don't want you to go to a point where you completely lock out and possibly let some slack in the system. I want tension on your biceps throughout the exercise. Now, starting with this next repetition, and for all the rest of them, when your elbows are as far back as you can pull them, I want you to think about pulling your elbows into the back of your ribs. Pause, slow on the negative. Nice and slow. Good. Just keep going as hard as you can. Drive the elbows down and back, pull them in, squeeze. Keep the chest high. Raise the chest. Think about touching the elbows to the back of the ribs. Hold, keep breathing, and slowly let it back. On the pulling exercises, the tendency is for people to start to hold their breath in the finished position as the exercise gets a little bit harder. Be aware of it. As you approach that position, be mindful of your breathing. Continue to breathe, squeeze, but keep breathing. Good. And slow it down a little bit on the way down. Take your time. Focus a little bit further out. Hold it up a little bit further. You want to go until the elbows are almost straight. And then focus on bending your elbows and squeezing your biceps.
Good get out.
Grips you on?
I didn't use hooks.
Yeah. Well,
Not gonna watch.
yeah, don't use hooks, and the grip will eventually
Can't
catch
knock
up and everything else. Yeah, you don't want to get too far past your grip on that one. We're going to do a pushing exercise next, though, so that won't be that much of a chest press. We got a couple of adjustments: the seat height and the seat back, and then we're going to pin it out. The height of the seat.
Yeah, I used to pin this too.
Yeah, on this one you need to. What you want on the Medics machine, you want the seat high enough that your hands are just a little bit below the chest in the starting position. You want the back of the seat far enough forward so that in the finished position the hands are only a little bit apart.
And the Medics has that, the Nitro does not. The Nitro doesn't go back far enough.
No, the Nitro does not go back far enough. You actually do have to pin it with some people on the Nitro too, depending on shoulder.
You can pin the Nitros? Can you pin them?
You can pin a regular weight stack,
Okay.
but it's a lot easier to do with the Medics weight stacks because of the way that they're designed. And I'm gonna make some guesses with your height. For legs. What you need to do is, actually first I'm going to just demonstrate real quick. My chart, I might see this On the pulling exercise, we just talked about the grip. You want to start with a grip on the pads. You want to do almost the exact opposite with a pushing exercise. Pushing exercise, you want to have the handle lined up so that in whatever direction that you're pushing, the heel of the palm is in line with the handles in the direction you're pushing.
Basically right there.
Yeah, we're going to put right by where the curve is in the handle.
That's what I did the kind of match when I did this back at Rollins. That's where I felt the best place to grip it. But
Yeah,
it's right
if you notice, there's a curve of padding right about there. That's generally where you want to have that. We're going to have you positioned so that the hands are a little bit below the chest starting out. And there's a couple things with the chest press. There's a concept, and it's something that Ken Hutchins wrote about a long time ago, really pushes. It's the real versus the assumed objective during exercise. A lot of times when a person is lifting, if they're using a barbell or if they're using a machine, they're more focused on the movement of the machine or the movement of the barbell than what their body is doing during the exercise. There are hundreds of ways to make these handles go back and forth and to make the weight go up and down. We can stand over here and pull on it. We can sit here and lean on it. I mean, we can come up with all sorts of crazy things. And if you go to the gym, yeah, people do stupid stuff. During the exercise, the machine is designed to provide resistance to a specific body movement. How the machine moves is not so important as how your body is moving. The machine is designed to provide resistance to that body movement to address those particular muscles. If you change the way your body's moving during the exercise, you change either the muscles involved or you change the degree to which the muscles you're trying to work on.
And you're defeating the purpose of the machine.
Exactly. Now, the chest press is a good one to use to explain this to people because it's one where there's a really obvious thing that people do. Now, you're trying to work your chest, the front of your shoulders, your triceps, mainly. Other things are involved, but that's what you're trying to hit. And basically, you're flexing your shoulders, you're extending the arms. What you'll see is, as people start to fatigue on this one, they'll start to slump forward. Now notice, I'm not doing anything with the shoulders, anything with arms. I'm not even, protracting my shoulders. My arms are still. What I'm doing is leaning into it, almost turning it into an abdominal exercise.
And your legs are going to kick out in addition to that.
Yeah,
right?
people do all sorts of silly stuff. I usually just cross my legs, let them, stay there. But it's important, and not just in the chest press, but everything, to keep in mind that the important thing is not making the handles go back and forth, making the barbell go up and down, or whatever you're doing during the exercise, with the machine or the barbell, but it's how your body is moving. You never want to change the way your body's moving for the sake of getting the weight or the handles to move. You're completely defeating the purpose. And the thing that I want you to focus on in this
Is there an
one,
exception to that, though, if it's like the last rep that you're not going to get otherwise?
there are some things there. There's
The exception that proves the rule.
the exception. Here's where that might come in. For example, in cheating with a barbell curl as an example. Suppose you're doing a set of curls, and you get to a point where you absolutely just can't get that last repetition. You cheat a little bit with the body to get the top position so that you can lower it properly. And that might be an example. Thing is, there are some exercises where you can do that, and there are some exercises where you can't do that. In this one, if you can't lock out the arms, doing this moves the handles, but it's not going to get you any further. If there was some way you could get the arms out and then go back and get a full negative, then that might be one thing. But it's a thing where you got to look at it exercise by exercise, and it also depends on how you get it there. If you finish the rep by altering your body mechanics, and you do so without compromising anything, then you might be getting some benefit out of it if you can get that extra negative, as long as you do the negative correctly.
Yep.
But if you're using, a lot of momentum, if you're trying to bounce the weight up, or if you're swinging, or if you're doing something that would compromise safety, then you don't, because you're going to probably do more damage than whatever benefit would be worth to getting that extra negative. For the most part, unless you really know what you're doing, and quite frankly, that's not the majority of people who work out. Most people should, as much as possible, try and maintain strict form. Now, on the chest press, you want to keep the chest high. You should have just enough space that you can fit a hand between your back and the back pad. doing that prevents you from doing that most common cheat. If you're not rounding forward, then you're safe on that. Also, you want to make sure that you keep the shoulders down and back. You want to kind of keep your shoulder blades pulled together a little bit on this one. It should feel like you're almost squeezing the shoulder blades together as you're pressing out. What you don't want is for this kind of a thing where you're slumping forward. Something else to watch is the shoulders coming up. Some people start to let their shoulders come up. You want to keep them down. Also, the elbows. The elbows shouldn't be tucked in real close to the body. They shouldn't be way out to the side. Elbows, if you were to have your arms straight, should fall off maybe about 30, 45 degrees or so off the body. You don't want to have them way out here. Don't want to have them way down here. They should kind of point off at an angle. Now, with the chest up, the head moves back. What you don't want, though, is for your head to touch the pad, because then the tendency, especially when you're pushing, is to start to bridge with the neck.
Yep.
You want your chest high, but you want to have the head forward, chin down slightly, so that you don't have a lot of tension in the back of the neck. Now, again, 3 things. We're going to get the seat high enough so the hands are just below the chest in the starting position. We're going to have the seat back forward far enough, and I should actually bring this even a little bit further forward, so that when you approach the end of the movement, chest up and shoulders back, the handles end up just a few inches apart. Yeah.
And there's no lockout, of course, either.
Huh?
Where there's no lockout, there's no...
Yeah, you
It's
go
not
till the elbows are almost, but you don't really lock out on this one. You go till they're almost but not completely straight. And then we're going to start, or we're going to pin it to start, so the hands are right at about the chest. You'll notice the elbows come down as they go back, and beyond some point, the elbows start coming up. We don't want to pass that point. We're also going to see what's going on with chest and shoulders, because you want to feel a stretch in your chest, want to feel a little bit of a stretch in the shoulders, but it shouldn't feel like it's really tight across the chest and shoulders and starting.
I wanted to actually do lower back, but it's okay because James Steele, you know who he is?
Yeah, over in England.
Yeah, over in England. He's huge. Lower back's like his life's focus. Like he's getting like a PhD in that lower back pain. Pretty awesome. And he's a huge. He has access in London, like the best medics equipment, all the medical versions and everything.
Well, let him do that, because if we start on this, we're going to spend a lot of time, because there's a whole bunch of stuff. We could spend about half an hour just on the low back machine.
And I want to use it. But
Awesome machine.
London.
Yeah. I'll just have you take a seat. I want you to just, and again, start the handle, start your grip from the pads right on the heel of the palm.
Okay.
A little bit higher. You want to have the palm right about in the curve of the handle on this one. And you want to raise the chest, arch the back edge, you have just a little bit of space, kind of pull your shoulder blades together. Now, the starting position looks good. I want you to slowly press out, and I just want to see where you finished up with this one.
It feels kind of like my wrists are, like it feels like I'm gonna like something.
If it feels like the wrists are going to come down,
You see
you
I'm
move the
fucking
hands down a little bit.
Yeah.
Also move them up. You want to have, again, it's going to feel at first like you have to have the hands behind it, but remember, it doesn't go straight forward. It actually comes in. So if the hands are just a tiny bit to the outside, it's fine. They're not going to slip on this one.
It almost feels like that's like the perfect spot right there for me.
Well, that's fine.
Yeah. That's where I used to do that right there.
Now, keep your chest up, pull your shoulders back, pull your shoulder blades together, just a little bit of space between the low back and the seat. Let it back slowly. As you're letting it back, keep the chest high, though. How's the shoulders?
And it feels good?
Okay, it should feel a little bit of a stretch, but it shouldn't feel like the joint is tight.
Yeah, it's good.
Okay.
It feels like it used to back when I used to do these.
I'm going to bump this up a little bit. How much on the Nitro?
220. For 8, maybe 9 reps.
Try that there.
You have a one shot or just go?
If it ends up being too heavy, we can do a drop set.
Yeah, good.
Or a few forced repetitions.
Yeah.
And again, chest high, shoulders back, pull the shoulder blades together. Little bit of an arch in the back. Think about squeezing the chest and shoulders, and as you get out a little bit further, focus more on the triceps, and you want to turn around just before lockout, just prior to it. You should be almost there. Slow it down and lightly touch. The bottom out on this one should be treated just like the leg press. You want to anticipate it, slow down to meet it so that the weights touch, but you don't set them down. You immediately but slowly start the next rep. 2, 3, good, and then just a little slower on the negative. Breathe as relaxed, as natural naturally as possible. Now, the tendency in the pulling exercises is to hold the breath towards the end of the range of motion. It's the opposite when you're pushing. As the exercise gets harder, be really mindful of your breathing as you start each rep. Again, if we were doing powerlifting, if we're doing some competitive stuff with a shorter duration positive, if a person has had anything that would contraindicate it, a little Valsalva is not going to kill you. But here, I want you breathing continuously. And take your time in the negative. Watch that you don't get too close to lockout. Chest high, really almost exaggerate the arch. And squeeze. Watch the breathing. Slow on the negative. And let it touch, but don't set it down. Start it slow, and then I want you to gradually push a little harder. Keep going, keep pushing. Even if you can't move it, you can still try to push against it. Chest high, raise the chest, breathe, breathe, raise your chest. I'm going to hand it back to you. It is yours. Slow on the negative. Even slower. Now let it touch, but don't set it down. One more. I want you to continue to push as hard as you can. Relax the grips. Keep on. No, keep pushing. Keep pushing. You can keep pushing. Yeah, I'm not helping that much. It might not feel like it. I'm going to hand it to you. Hold it right there. Right there. Stop it. Try to stop it. It is yours. Now try to stop it. Don't even lower it. Just try to put the brakes on. Keep pushing into it as hard as you can. 5 more seconds. Don't let off. Even if it touches, don't let off. 2, 1, ease off. Okay. With the seated row, we're basically doing another pulling movement. So the gripping is the same as the pull down. You start with the pads right behind the fingers, wrap the fingers around, clamp the thumb down over the index and middle fingers. Your grip should be right about halfway between the top and where the handle starts to curve. You want to have your middle knuckle and your wrist in line with where this rotates so that as you're pulling, you don't have the wrist end up getting bent up or bent down as you get towards the end of the movement. We're going to put this just far enough back so that at the start you really have to reach for that. And you should have to, but I want you to really have to reach for it so that when you arch the back a little bit, even with the shoulders forward and the arms almost straight, the weights don't touch down. You want to stay loaded into it. So you're going to kind of slump when you're getting the weight, but you're going to arch your back to load yourself into it.
The starting position is just where the weight's off of it.
Yeah, so the weights are just off. And we'll adjust the chest pad for that position. Now, a couple things. You want, and let's grab this down one, demonstrating here. You want your feet positioned, actually, that's skipping over some stuff. Now this might seem like a picky little detail, but whenever you've got a machine like this where you're facing into it, when you get into and out of the machine, you want to walk straight in, straight back out. If it's like a chest press or like this tricep machine, pull down, you just kind of sit back in. Make sure that you're aware of anything you can bang your shins on, but there's not a lot to it.
Yeah.
But with something like this, the reason that I have people go straight in and straight back out is if you got anybody that's got any kind of knee issues, hip issues, ankle issues, if you're standing next to it and you're doing this and turning, getting in, or if you're on it here and you're turning, getting out, you are rotating around the hip, knee, and ankle on the other leg, and the carpet grabs pretty well, and these shoes definitely do. Normally, it's not a big deal. People get onto and off of bikes, bar stools, and stuff. Huh?
You're doing this, your head's elsewhere. It's not on what you're doing.
Exactly.
It's on your body.
That, and if somebody just finished that leg press, or just finished a leg extension, or deadlifts, or anything that really fries the legs, something that normally would be an easy thing, yeah, you lose your balance a little bit. You over-rotate, you end up tweaking your knee or your ankles. And it's just a real simple thing. Just straight in, straight back out without swinging the legs on or off. Also, if you're coming straight into this versus doing that, you're suddenly face-to-face with that, which if that's further forward, you end up banging your head on it. If you're coming this way, you're aware of everything in front of you the entire time getting in and out. Yeah.
Pain tolerance.
Exactly, exactly. Now during the exercise, your feet should actually be behind your knees. if the feet are in front of the knees, you're in a position where the leverage allows you to pull back. Same thing we talked about in the chest press. You don't want to change your body movement for the sake of moving the handles. You want to maintain correct body movement. Well, this is what a lot of people do on this one. They start getting stuck. They can't pull any further. They start to arch back. They're trying to move the handles instead of focusing on doing the body movement that they should be during the exercise. If you put your feet so that your toes are behind your knees, you have, even if you drop the weight way down, you just basically, in fact, I can't get off the thing very far, but here you can do that. If you get your feet back behind your knees, you have no leverage to get your chest off the pad, which is what we want. So once you're in position, just bring the feet back so they're just behind the knees, and then just you arch the back a little bit. The shoulders should still be able to move all the way forward, all the way back. Again, you're not looking for really, really extreme stretch, but you want to have the movement around the shoulder joints back and forth, as well as the movement of the arms, movement of the forearms. I'm actually going to bring this forward just a little bit. I've got big, long, monkey arms.
I've got short Neanderthal arms.
So we might need to go even a little bit further forward. Again, you want to stand behind it, come straight into the seat. And remember the grip. The center of the straight part of the handle, about halfway between the top and where it curves, start with the pads behind the fingers, and you want to try and clamp your thumb down on the nail of the index and middle finger if you can. Now, if you bring your feet back, then arch the back a little bit.
Yeah,
You move the seat back. You got to move it back because I want to have this weight stack gapped a little bit when you're in the starting position, about there, so that you don't unload. As a general rule, if you're doing a pushing movement, you want to be as close in as you can without excessive stress on the joints. With a pulling movement, you want to be as far away as you can. Both cases are so that you get as much range of motion as you can out of the machine. Here we go. Well, and this is not the work weight. I'm just going to have you do a repetition so I can see what it looks like. Now, you want to make sure you keep the head forward, chin down a little bit. There's a bolt right down there, and I want you to focus on that. You definitely don't want to move the head or neck too much in this one. There's going to be a lot of tension in the trapezius, back of the neck. Right, try and bring your elbows as far back as you can. At least get your elbows a little behind the ribs. Is that it? A little further. And really drive the elbows back.
Yeah, this is an exercise too I've had like very little experience with movement. Never had access to one.
Right to about there. Good. And how's the weight?
It's alright.
After the pull down, you're not going to be able to handle as much as another pulling movement.
Can we start up with a new weight or?
We'll stay with this one.
Let's keep going.
Does it feel like it's too light on it?
I wasn't even anticipating starting it. I'm going to give it a second and restart it. I was just kind of.
Oh, well, do you want it heavier, or is that good for? Again,
It's hard to say. It probably.
guess low, because after doing the pull down,
Yeah.
it's going to be.
My grip's falling apart.
Yeah, we'll
already.
stay with this one for right now. Yeah. Start from the pads behind the fingers. Try and clamp the thumb down on the index, middle finger if you can. And then just kind of raise the chest, arch the back a little bit, head forward and down.
How's this?
That's good. Focus on bending the elbows at first, and then as you get further back, focus more on pulling the elbows back, pulling the shoulder blades together. As you let the handles back forward, think about what we did on the pull down with the timing. The shoulders, the elbows should all be moving together so that when the elbows are almost straight, the shoulders should be forward. Same going the way back. You want to pull your elbows, or bend your elbows as you're pulling the shoulders back. So the elbows are bent as far as they go, shoulders are as far as you can pull them at the same time. And we get that timing down between all of the parts of the movement, so that everything is continuously working throughout the exercise. Even if a muscle's just holding a weight, it's still working, but you're actually a lot stronger holding a weight or lowering than you are lifting. So by having one segment not moving while another finishes up, it's almost like giving it a little bit of a break during the exercise. Now I want you to start squeezing the shoulder blades together towards the end. And allow a little bit of a stretch in the back. Don't let the elbows completely straighten. Keep just a tiny, tiny bend. Allow a little bit of a stretch between the shoulder blades. You feel it all the way across the upper back. Drive the elbows as far back as you can. Squeeze the shoulder blades together. Breathe all the way through. Yep. Just keep on. Focus on bending the elbows. A little further. A little further. Good.
I'm nauseous.
Breathe more. Scale of 1 to 10, how is it?
So sick.
Set it down. Set it down.
Chocolate. Maybe it's bad too, getting in my gut.
Bucket? Oh yeah, that makes it a little bit more difficult. When you past 2 years at the 21 convention, I talked a little bit more about the basics of high intensity training. You know, the intensity, volume, frequency. This year at the 21 convention, I'm going to be discussing applying the principles of high intensity training and exercise performance, the nuts and bolts of performing the exercises. You know, range of motion, speed, different high intensity training techniques. For 8 people, I'll also be providing a workshop where you can get hands-on experience and professional instruction applying the things that I'll be talking about in the presentation here at One Body Personal Training in Altamont Springs.
That's about 15-20 minutes to the hotel.
Yeah, about 15-20 minutes or so from the convention.
And it's limited to 8 people?
Yeah, limited to 8 people. It's going to be about 4 hours. We're going to go over a lot of stuff, even more stuff than I'm going to talk about in the presentation. And we're going to go into a lot of detail, and everybody's actually going to get to try the stuff with me supervising them, because it's one thing to hear about it. It's one thing to read about it, but high-intensity training, and especially the level of effort involved and the attention to detail of form, is something that it's really got to be experienced to be appreciated. I've only got so many hours, only have so much space, so it's going to be a first come, first serve for 8 people.
Do you want to announce the price yet, or just understand?
Price at $250.
Cool. Limited to 8 people.
Yeah, limited to 8 people though.
I recommend it as someone who can barely stand right now.
Yeah, we'll leave you feeling like Anthony does right now.
Hey guys, Anthony Johnson here from the Dream Lounge and Total Convention. Drew just kicked my ass in his new studio, and I want to let you guys know that I am trying to get Drew out to London. The costs are a little bit high due to the transatlantic flight, lodging, and all that, but Drew is willing to do it, especially in light of the popularity of the podcast he and I did on daygame.com with Andy Yosho. So we've set this up that if you sign up for London, the Tournament Convention in London, on May 15th, and you comment in how you heard about the site that you want Drew Baye in London, if enough of you guys sign up by that date, May 15th, I will give it my absolute best to fly Drew out there and make that happen. So you guys can meet him in person, experience what he has to say. For all we know, do a small workshop in London, like he's doing in Orlando.
If we can set up an arrangement with a studio out there, plus
Yep.
I'll be right there to answer any questions that anybody has. If it's one thing to watch videos,
Yep.
watch the past ones, even to read the stuff online, but if you have any particular concerns, stuff about your diet, stuff about your training that you want to know, I'll be able to answer those questions for you while I'm there.
There's nothing in the world like face-to-face access, and Drew coming to London is exactly that. Not even considering doing a small workshop like he was talking about in Orlando, where you go through the exercises in the facility in London and you go on machines just like this.
If there's enough of an interest,
May 15th,
I'm all for it.
mention you want Drew Baye out there, and I'll make it happen if there's enough of you guys. I want to make it happen anyway, so let's work together and do it. Okay, guys.
Excellent job today.